Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. So I'm Angela Redmond, and I am with the Nebraska Grazing Coalition. I'm located in central Nebraska. I am the assistant coordinator. We have multiple programs, which I will talk about here later, but I just want to welcome you here today, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our panelists. I'm pretty excited to hear each of their stories and what they have to share. We're going to kick it off with Kyle Brungardt. He is with Rabo Bank, and he is the managing director. We'll follow him with Allan Vyhnalek with UNL Extension out of Lincoln, and he is going to give us the why is succession planning important, the meat and potatoes of succession planning. And then we're going to wrap up our panel with Coby Buck with Rabo Ranch and AgriWebb. Coby's going to give us the next generation's thoughts on succession planning and give us some resources. So again, hit the chat with your questions, and we'll start off with Kyle here. Kyle is a managing director of the Mountain Plains region for Rabo AgriFinance. He oversees customer relations teams in Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Wyoming, and parts of Nebraska, leading functional teams in the growth and execution of business development. The territory provides financial services to leading farmers, ranchers, and agribusinesses who produce and further process small grains and oil seeds, dairy, poultry, vegetables, and fruits, and beef cattle in a diverse area of the country. Over 50% of the Mountain Plains region lending relationships are within the beef sector, from cow-calf, stocker, seed stock, backgrounding, and feed yards. Kyle has over 20 years of agricultural lending experience, along with his experience on the business side. Kyle has several leadership roles within the credit side as well, and he holds a bachelor's degree in agricultural business and finance from Colorado State University. Thank you, Kyle. We'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Want to thank AgriWebb for putting this together and including Rabo AgriFinance as a lender to speak to this topic. This is a hard topic, but it's a topic that your lender is always thinking about as well. When you enter a relationship, we don't like to talk about the unforeseen, what's coming in the future, but we need to know from a credit perspective, from a risk perspective. We do cover this area within our underwriting, and so we do discuss this with clients. If your lender isn't discussing it with you, I would say bring it up because it is on their mind. We know it's a hard discussion, but it's something that has to be had. This discussion has to happen. And, it's easier to start it earlier, and Allan will hit on this more so as he's the expert on this, but it's easier to start the discussion earlier than it is to have an unforeseen event happen, and then you're forced into that discussion and a lot more pressures around it. The sooner you can start it, get a plan going, keep your lender in the loop, the easier that's going to be. Examples that I have, and I'm sure Allan and Coby will hit here as well, but this ranges from a simple just pass on to the next generation, or there may be several individuals within the family or the succession plan that want different operations, want different enterprises that are sitting within the overall umbrella of the operation. So those are all key things to discuss, because as a lender, we need to know where it's moving to, what the cash flow is. Maybe one operation supporting the other enterprises. So we've really got to understand on what you as owners, operators, and that operation want to look like when this succession planning does go into place. And so I would just say, keep your lender involved, always keep it front of mind, and keep the discussion open. It's a hard one, but we need to do it. Again, it gets trickier when you have to be pushed into this discussion, these decisions, and we encourage our relationships to have them early so that they're not making fast decisions. They know where they're headed. So really, I just wanted to emphasize that that's really key from a lender's perspective, because it will get harder if you don't have this discussion earlier. And so, Angela, that's really what I wanted to say. I'm open to questions, but I know Allan will hit on big topics on the meat and potatoes of this, but I just really wanted everybody to know that your lender's thinking about it. We know this is a hard discussion, but it needs to be done, and it's best for that operation if it's done earlier than later.
All right, thanks, Kyle. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but if you think of something, feel free to send those in the chat and we'll hit you at the end with them. All right, our next panelist is Allan Vyhnalek. He is with the University of Nebraska Extension. Allan has spent over 34 years in Extension, working both in Iowa and Nebraska. He is a native of Saline County and has received a Bachelor and Master's of Science degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in Agriculture Education. He currently works as the Extension Educator for Farm and Ranch Succession and Transition statewide. For the past 15 years, he has helped lead the Extension education effort for farm management, including ag leasing for Nebraska. He has a passion for the future of rural Nebraska and is interested in helping individual groups and communities understand how good communications, negotiation skills, and general differences relate to how communities and families function as we develop Nebraska for future generation. Thank you, Allan, for joining us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Now let's see if I can do this like I did prior. Before it worked, and we're going to say it's going to work again. Okay, you should be able to see my slides. Is that correct, Angela?
I actually can't see them yet.
The slides aren't there? Nothing? Really? Okay, hang on. Well, it worked last time. Can you see me? Okay.
Yep.
All right, let's try again. Share a screen, share this one. Okay, slideshow. All right, how's that help?
Allan, if I need to jump in and share my screen, I think we're still seeing you.
You seeing me?
I
okay. Just a minute. Let's come up with a different idea here.
I'm pulling up your slides right now, and I'm
just a minute. I am really sorry. This worked perfectly before. I don't understand why it's not working now. Okay, just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, let's try this, except that I can't figure out. Okay, hang on. Did that work?
There you go.
All right. Okay, no problem. Okay, what did I do wrong? Can you see my slides? No. Hang on, one more time. Okay, now, how's that? I apologize. Are we there?
Got him, Allan. Yes.
Okay, I got him. All right, very good. I'm sorry. I apologize for the holdup. So I'm Allan Vyhnalek. This is how you get a hold of me. I've got a lot of my stuff, my complete talk and all that stuff is at that webpage. You're welcome to leave a phone message. Just know that like days like today, I'm not even at the office. But I get my messages every day via email. So just go ahead and leave a message. And then that's my email address. Okay, sorry. I just screwed up again. Let's try this again. Okay, let's try this. Will that help? I am doing something wrong. Just to show slides.
You're good, Allan. You're good.
I'm good. No, but if I can't go to the next slide,
I think you're at the end.
Too.
Alan, you're at the end of your presentation. So if you go back,
Oh my God.
there you go.
That's
You were just
embarrassing.
ready to.
That's embarrassing.
go.
Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. All right. I'm sorry. Here we're trying again. So I enjoyed what Kyle had to say, and I would have to echo what he said. It's absolutely critical that your lender be involved with this every step of the way. I think that's a critical piece. But before you start any estate planning, and everybody realizes they need to have one, but they don't always get started on one. But before you start any estate planning, have these conversations first. First, are you going to have a family when you get done? I think that's a critical piece. I think that everybody needs to have that commitment, and don't make that assumption, because I've run into situations where somebody gets dollar signs in their head and they just get jealous and envious and greedy, and it just messes up the family. And that happens all the time. So let's sit the family down first and say, do you understand that when we get done with this, we still want to have a family? And mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, who are the matriarch, patriarch, need to do that and make sure everybody's committed to that. And I think the second part, just as important, is that mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, whoever's in charge of making decisions of what happens next, they need to be on the same page. Because I've run into situations where grandpa told a son this and grandma told a daughter this, and now you spread that disagreement on to 2 generations, and that never works well. So make sure they're on the same page before they even start anything. I think those 2 points are critical. Now, so let's get into what the farm or ranch, in this case, a ranch succession and transition would look like, or transfer would look like. Step 1, what do you have? Always, whenever you go see a lawyer, they're going to want to know, well, what do you have? And if you don't have that listed down, then they're going to get out a pad of paper, and they're going to want to write it down manually. And that's all taking time, and lawyers cost $3 to $5, $6 a minute. So let's have this done ahead of time. A great way to look at this is to use the Ag Decision Maker file from Iowa State, C4-57, as a part of their Ag Decision Maker series. And it does a nice job of leading you through everything you need to get listed. Bankers have these kind of, it's actually a very detailed, complete balance sheet is what it is. Bankers have these kind of resources. Lawyers have these kind of resources, or you can download this one from Iowa State. This is cool because it's a PDF. It's a fill-in-the-blank PDF, and you don't have to necessarily write it all out. You just type it in and print it, that sort of thing. So what do you have? List everything you've got, all your stuff. It's an important step. First step. Second step, in my view, is let's get the family together and get input on what they think ought to happen with what you have. What happens to the cows? Who's interested? What happens to that north section of grass? What happens to the sub-irrigated meadow? Who's interested in what? Oh, by the way, and what happens to grandma's yellow pie plate? What happens to that antique tractor that's sitting out in the shed in parade condition? Who's interested in having any of those things? Is anybody, what do we want? So you're going to get your family together, and you're going to have that discussion, and everybody should be able to look at each other in the eye. And you're just trying to find out what's going on and what everybody's interested in. And it's no decision making. In other words, when the whole family gets together, don't try and make any decisions, but we can make sure you have the right people involved. You have to plan this very carefully to avoid disaster, because if you don't plan it carefully, you will have a disaster on your hands. Absolutely. And so mom and dad, grandpa and grandma should be there. And the kids probably should be there, son, daughter, son, daughter, son, daughter. And that's where a lot of lawyers will say, stop. They don't want the spouses there, and they don't want any grandkids there. And that's where I say, wait a minute. I just went through this. My mother-in-law just passed away back in June. And I know that as a son-in-law that's been with that family for 47 years, that I appreciated being included in some of the family discussions about what was going to happen next. I didn't necessarily have to have a lot of input, because I wasn't the blood relative, but I sure wanted to know what was happening. That's an important part. How else I think that it's important that all the in-laws be there, because I think they have to feel like they're part of the family too, and they are a part of the family. So let's have the in-laws involved as it's appropriate. And then the grandkids, that's probably a different discussion. Quite honestly, I think we're a little bit careful about grandkids. I think there's 15 and 16-year-old grandkids that should be involved because they're mature enough and they're showing interest in the ranch, and they should be involved. And I think there's 22 and 23-year-olds that probably shouldn't be, because they have no interest in, and they're not mature, and so don't have them come necessarily. But you're having this meeting to have input for everyone, and make sure that when people give their input on what they think ought to happen, that nobody criticizes ideas. And if you have one person dominating the conversation, you institute a gag rule if you need to and say, when we're talking about the north section of grass, everybody gets a chance to talk once, and we won't have anybody talk a second time until everyone's had a chance. And then you have to make sure that you moderate that very carefully so that everyone does have a chance and no one's left out. So, and then after you get done with that, the decision-making phase will be the people will implement what I call the golden rule, and what a lot of succession planners call the golden rule. In this case, the golden rule is not what we hear. In this case, what the golden rule is not what we hear at church, do unto others thing. This one is you as the gold makes the rule. So maybe it's just mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, matriarch, patriarch. They make those decisions. No one else is involved. Or maybe it's them and their children. No one else involved. And clearly, you don't want to include spouses necessarily, and you certainly don't want to include any grandchildren. It's a meetings about decisions and what they would like to see happen, and how that they want to have that whole thing proceed. Now, the whole family meeting concept is kind of a family by family decision. I recommend it, but in some cases, there's situations where you go, nah, yeah, we probably don't want to do that. And that's completely up to each family. Every family has to figure that out for themselves. But I'm saying it's a good idea. And then the next step then is that kind of some base decisions have been made. Now let's get it all written down. In a perfect world, what happens to your stuff? Are you keeping it? Are you selling it? Are you gifting it? Are you transferring it? Are you succeeding it? And let your thoughts be known, and how you're going to put that all together. What's that final plan that you would love to see happen? Now, notice what I don't have included here. What I don't have included here is that we don't have our trust put together. We don't have our LLC put together. We don't have a will put together. This is not that step. This step is just writing down, in my utopia, my perfect world, here's what happens to all my stuff. I think that's what's got to happen separately from anything else that you do. And then the next step then after that then is go to get your employers involved. And it's going to include your lawyer, obviously. That's why I have that one in red. But it's also going to include all these other people, professionals, plus some others in your situation, to help you finalize that plan and put that together. Obviously somebody like a tax person has to be involved because they're going to help you hold taxes back if you make some decision that has tax consequences. Your lawyer has to employ the right tool, right? They have to put in the will, or the will and trust, or will and LLC. I mean, you have to figure out what that looks like, but you allow them to do that. You trust that lawyer to do that. And if you don't trust a lawyer, find a different lawyer. A financial planner would be helpful if you really want to get something going with investments, that sort of thing. An insurance person, if you start young enough, it's a possibility to buy some insurance products to help take care of that operation. In other words, if I have an on-farm kid and they have several off-farm brothers and sisters, the on-farm kid can buy insurance policy on the parents. Then when the parents pass, that generates cash to help get the other kids out of the system, and yet they feel like they've been treated equitably. But the on-farm kid has the farm asset or the ranch asset to be able to continue. And then, so of course, the banker, they want to make sure they get paid. I don't blame them for that. They have to mitigate their risk too. So that's that 4-step process to that point. And then so then once you get that all sine-died, set and finished, good for you, congratulations. How long do you expect to go through that? You can't get this done in 3 days or 3 weeks, but you sure can get it done in 3 to 6 months. So my challenge to everyone listening in is, if you don't have a succession plan, and I noted from the poll that about 60% of you did not have a succession plan in place, or an estate plan in place. So that means that over half don't. I mean, that's typical. That's a very typical number. Over half do not. Don't feel like you're alone. You're one of many. But you have 3 to 6 months to get that done. So what my challenge is to get everyone to understand that by 4th of July, you should have one. 4th of July, 2023, have a big party. We got a succession plan in place. We know how this is going to go forward. Now, a couple other things. I think I got a little bit of time left here. Let me take a look. Yeah, I'm good. So the older generation, we have to consider what's going to happen with them. And this all has to be part of the plan. And so I want to get into some of this a little bit. The older generation, if they've delayed their travel, if they delayed their any of those needs that they need in retirement, any of those financial needs they need in retirement, then you have to start allocating for that. And as I'm approaching retirement, one of the financial needs I'm going to have to get covered is the supplemental, the Medicare supplement and Medicare Part D plan and some things like that have to be paid for. The older generation also has to talk about the plan needs to be made for where they're going to live. I'm working with one farm family where the kids asked for a part of the home place or home acreage to put up their house, and the older couple said, "No, we were planning to move to town. You could stay here in our house." And then it got really uncomfortable in the room, and found out then after a minute or two that essentially the daughter-in-law, who was coming out with her husband to take over the operation, didn't like the house that was on the farm. And to be true, it was one of those 2-story frame houses that we all grew up in, that I grew up in, where the only heat that came to the upstairs was through a little vent in the floor. And so that wasn't going to be good enough for her children to be in. And I understand that. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying, make sure that's been discussed. And then if and I haven't really brought this up yet, but if we have non-farm heirs, but we want them to be treated some equitably with the estate plan, then how are we going to contribute or put together the assets to make that happen? Are we going to have fair versus equal? Are we going to have equal versus fair? And I would submit that equal is not fair and fair is not equal. If you're lucky enough to have somebody come back to your operation, then I think part of your plan has to be how you're going to get them to be successful in that operation. Because quite honestly, if somebody does to this generation what my parents did to my generation, we'll put the on-farm or on-range kid out of business. Because my generation, our parents did to us was, if I was one of 4 kids, I got 25% when mom and dad passed away, and I had to pay off my brothers and sisters to get them out of the deal. And the bottom line on that is if we do that to this generation, we just put them out of business. So we have to think very carefully about how we're going to make sure that business succeeds. And that's something that has to be absolutely put together. For the younger generation, they've got some lifestyle needs that they need, some lifestyle situations they need. And we have to understand that, like with cell phone and the wireless and laptops and Hulu and Zulu and all the other services, streaming services we want and all that sort of thing, that you're talking about $200 to $400 per family per month. And a lot of the older people don't necessarily understand that. So make sure there's no disconnect there. Their growth of business, debt, ownership versus renting, they may have to just rent for the time being. And then the family values is an interesting concept or a thought, because quite honestly, the older people expect work because that's what we grew up with. We grew up with work first, family second. But a lot of the younger generations, Xers on down, millennials and now the iGens, they're all family first. And I'm not being critical, and I'm not being critical of us. I'm just being critical. I'm just saying there's a disconnect there. Make sure you have that kind of talk through and understand what's going to happen on weekends and on nights and in evenings and all those kind of things, and how are you going to handle ball games and all that sort of thing. So just have those conversations about what the priorities are and how that's going to be traversed. So I won't probably take time with this, but just understand that you have 4 phases of transfer if you're lucky enough to have somebody join you on the operation. There's the testing phase. Are they willing to do all the tasks? There's the management transfer phase. Are we willing to start giving them control of the operation after a period of time? Because quite honestly, the younger generation, if we just put them on the business end of fencing pliers and the business end of a pitchfork, they're not going to stick around very long. We have to give them some management. And what is that going to look like for your operation? There's also an asset or enterprise transfer phase. I think about livestock machinery when I talk about that. And can we get going on that quicker? And so make sure you use the gift tax exclusion each year. And this year at 22, it's 16,000. At 23, it's going to be 17,000. So that's an important thing to consider, and ask your CPA about that option or opportunity. And then the whole farm or business or farmland transfer is going to be usually at the passing of the previous generation, because the basis improvement you need to capture given today's laws, so that you end up getting that basis improvement. So if farms have to be sold, you don't have a capital gains issue. So be careful about gifting. A lot of older generation thinks that they should gift, so that they don't end up with the farm or the ranch the nursing home taking my ranch. The nursing home's going to get my ground if I'm not careful. Well, be careful about gifting, because if you can gift, it's a possibility. It's obviously an option. But then the younger generation does not get the improvement in basis, which I just talked about. Changes in family can be troublesome. In other words, if I give a farm to my kids, then one of the kids ends up with creditor problems, then that could be a problem. If one of the kids ends up getting divorced, that ex-spouse could be a problem in terms of trying to grab some of that asset. And so be careful about those kind of issues that you can have come up. And I'm kind of out of time. Do all this with written plans, get this all timed out and written down, and use job descriptions to be very clear about who's doing what and who's taking care of what, knowing that you have to help each other to get through those big things like branding. So those are my main comments, and I'm sorry I started at the end, and I'm sorry I had trouble with that. It worked perfectly before, and I'll turn it back over to Angela now, but thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Allan. You might need to end your share. We're gonna move on with Coby Buck. He currently serves as Director of Strategic Accounts at AgriWebb. In his role, Coby advises ranchers, partners, and industry stakeholders to leverage the power of AgriWebb and improve operational efficiency, productivity, and economic viability. Coby grew up on the Ray Ranch, located at the junction of the Great Plains and Sandy Chop Hills of the northeastern Colorado. A fifth-generation cattle rancher, he was introduced to the family livelihood first by way of post-hole diggers, but over time he assisted his parents in deploying rotational grazing and other progressive ranch management practices. Today's topic hits close to home for him, as succession is a challenge that his family has continued to navigate. The recent years are no exception, as he and his parents and siblings look to bring their operation into the next generation. So I'll turn it over to Coby.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm here to provide a perspective from the younger generation. Succession, something that we've dealt with. We've gone through it 4 times, and now we're really entering the fifth test when it comes to succession, and really how to be successful during that transition. So as Angela mentioned, I grew up on a family ranch in eastern Colorado. This is a picture from my backyard, but I'll thankfully be able to forego my introduction since Angela did better than I could have wished. But to provide an overview of our operation, so we're a traditionally cow-calf designed operation with about 800 pairs, and we operate around 10,000 acres. With the ranching operation, it's also important to look at the family design on these topics. So my parents own and operate Ray Ranch as it lies. They're in the 50 to 60-year-old range. My father just turned 60 in December. So kind of pushing against that point in time where you feel like slowing down might be better for your health. I'm one of 4 kids. 3 of us are married. We're all 32 or younger. 1 is full-time on the ranch. Surprise, surprise, that is not me currently. And then the other 3 have different professions and also play an active role in strategy and management of our operation. So when we as a family looked at succession and looked at really the end result that we want, and the end result is we want to continue ranching, continue having that as a primary livelihood of our family base, and continue that legacy that we're very proud of. I mean, I think being stewards of the land, working outside, being able to work with your family is a strong family value that we've really looked at. I don't think the end result should be the goal. That's how we haven't really approached it, and I can dive into that during this presentation. Looking at our goals, really in the priorities at which they lie, maintaining strong, happy, and loving family relationships has to be number 1, or is number 1 for our family. I can step into that on the next slide. Then it comes to ensuring the longevity of economic viability for the operation. And finally, really being conscious of that previous generation, what their needs are, and prioritizing that above the upcoming generation. We unofficially started succession planning by unofficially started to think about it in the mid-2000s as all of us kids became teenagers. We really kicked off official estate planning in 2012. To this day, we do annual check-ins and then in-depth reviews every 5 years. and any major life event, births, marriages, profession changes, we review that during whenever they come along. The first thing that I would recommend is starting to plan for succession ASAP. And it doesn't have to be this formalized plan, but being able to write down goals and to create management plans, as Allan mentioned, is very important. Looking back, in 1995, there were 4 small kids on the ground. My family wanted to be a large family with maybe cheap labor for a little bit. We ran about 350 cows, and that was on 4,500 acres. So in the back of your mind, I mean, seeing how we all love the ranch and really appreciate it, you start to think about, well, what does succession look like if my family can draw a livelihood off of this size? I mean, with that next generation, it might be economically unviable to split that into quarters and have a little over 1,100 acres and 75 cows per family. So if the operation can't support multiple families, it's something to take note of and look for ways to adapt. My parents did a phenomenal job over the last 2 decades cultivating this. So one thing that I think plays or is underscored is prioritization of education. That can be formal education or informal education. Being able to allow each kid to grow as far as skill sets, being able to enrich their education to open up different professions if they pursue those. Also having that expansionary mindset, we worked very closely with our bankers to see was a risk that we can manage over a longer time frame to expand our operation to hopefully decrease the succession pressures as far as continuing to ranch. And then my parents have this policy where every kid had to leave the operation for a minimum of 5 years to get out there, work for someone else, go pursue an education or go to college. And then if they come back, they know why. And I think that this really leads into our first main goal. And one of my close contacts in the industry brought up a quote of this design. Ranches are rarely broken up because a company goes out of business. Instead, the vast majority of ranches are sold due to an untenable position created by disagreements and fighting within a family. I think that reigns very true. I think that when land comes up for sale, it's largely because there was a major life event within a family, or there was a position where no one really knew how to move forward in the family design, as opposed to someone simply going out of business. So by prioritizing family relationships, I think that helps mitigate the biggest risk to succession and to the continuation of your operation. As we step forward into profitability, to ensure success of the operation, the family needs to do whatever it takes to preserve the operational profitability. Your legacy at the end of the day doesn't matter if the ranch can't stay in business, if people cannot draw incomes from it. So as we've continued to adjust our succession plan, we instead look to potentially acquire a piece of land that mitigates our feed costs, or potentially look to have a cash surplus. So in a high interest rate environment, we don't have to draw as much on the operational line. Additionally, really being conscious of that key person risk. Ranching is not just physically intensive, we all know that, but it's also very knowledge intensive. So successors have to have the desire to do the work, to build the fence, to be out there in 0-degree weather or 110-degree weather. They need to have an intimate knowledge of the industry, or have the ability to learn and adapt within that industry. But more specifically, they need to have a deep understanding of how that property has been managed, how it should be managed, and the best ways to flex the operation to be conscious of continuation and profitability moving forward. Ideally, we look at this as in our family design, and we love an overlap of the previous generation with the previous generation and the successors to build that confidence, to build that trust, to build that understanding that the operation can continue to the next generation, and to be able to allow that next generation to learn dynamically. As far as assets for a successful transition, I kind of broke it into tactical and strategic perspectives. I'm going to drive home this education and professional development, because I really think that it is a pressure release valve for most operations. By requiring the next generation to pursue careers away from the ranch, it creates, if an individual has a successful career and they're less likely to come back, you know what, that mitigates the succession pressure and the transition stress by that much. Additionally, those that do come back are equipped to take over the ranch. My younger brother, who is currently on the operation and has been for the last 3 years, he went to Oklahoma State to study animal science and ag business, and then he got a master's certification at the TCU Institute for Ranch Management. That has allowed him to be equipped to take on the challenges and to be able to adapt to the cattle industry and taking over an operation. We also, I mean, in succession, in growth, we have a close team of advisors, informal advisors for the most part, but bankers, lawyers, accountants, as Allan mentioned, just a team that looks from the outside in and can provide a long-term planning and best strategy. A couple of other assets that I think have worked well is separating the land company from the operating or cattle company. We look at that, and that provides a little bit of flexibility when it comes to transitioning through succession, being able to allow those that come back to gain equity in the cattle side of things while the land continues to be audited and continues to change and becomes navigatable. And then with a cross-generational commitment to the ranching operation, if you have a lot of stakeholders buy in, I think being vigilant about the growth of the operation, looking for where you can expand, looking how you can diversify income streams and streamline your cost structures to be more profitable per unit is something that has been great kind of mindsets to create a strong foundation so that succession in and of itself is less stressful. On the tactical side, we have an operational plan. My younger brother revisited this and drafted 100+ page binder of the family operation, the grazing plans, the stocking rate, forage benchmarks, gross margin yields, and yields, a detailed inventory of infrastructure, property, herd count, and then additionally, on the day-to-day side, I work for AgriWebb, but we do deploy AgriWebb. And this is the ability to download the brain from the previous generation. Why did my dad move our heifers into the river pasture in April? Why did my dad turn out bulls in July? Like, being able to understand how to be successful on the daily basis, having that historical reference, we feel like is vital to our plan. Within AgriWebb, I mean, it's an all-in-one ranch management platform where we can see that infrastructure and track the herd inventories, the forage, the treatments, the feed, and be able to look back at that. So day to day, it's just been an enormous asset. And indirectly, it allows myself and my other 2 siblings that are not on the operation on a daily basis the ability to opine and our family to plan on potential growth scenarios, to understand the operation from an arm's length away, and really be caught up to speed on what's going on the day-to-day level. Finally, I just wanted to touch on generational relationships. So the previous generation, at the end of the day, succession is effectively inheriting the assets from the previous generation. Without their dedication, without their hard work, without their wherewithal and whatnot, succession really wouldn't be a problem. And I think that is something that we should all remain conscious of. So I look at this, and goal number 3 during succession planning is ensure that generation that's passing on the operation has that quality of life. Most ranchers, as Allan noted, don't want to retire. So staying in business, if they have a small cow herd, if they want to downsize their house, if they need to continue to draw income from the operation, I also look at strong health insurance, housing, the travel, the grandparent lifestyle is something that's very important. And then in retirement, when they slow down, having financial comfort, meeting that financial goal is a major priority for our family to look after the previous generation. During the generation that's ascending into management and ownership, as Allan also mentioned, fair is rarely equal, but in our family, we look at it as fair should not be easy either. So the most difficult situation in succession is when most or all of the next generation aspires to return. That's when you're looking to fractionize the ranch or have to adapt so that multiple family members can draw a living off of it. I do not have the answers there. Every succession plan is a bit unique. And then when it's not just everyone wants to come back, when it's the ones returning out of passion and the ability to draw sweat equity, I mean, that should be factored into their commitment and their overall allocation when it comes to succession. But the last one I want to note, and I think that this also gets undervalued, is the ones that do not come back. They're an asset as well. They avoid the stress of having multiple families draw income from one ranch. They allow flexibility within the operation and creativity to mitigate any transition risk. By them being self-sufficient and aspiring for professional careers outside of the operation, I think that that's enormous value. The first three siblings, or myself and my two older siblings, all pursued careers outside of the ranch for about a decade. We might come back, we might not, but that freed up a lot of stress when it came to having one person come over and begin managing. It opens up the opportunity for someone to become an active manager without drawing financial risk. A recap of the goal is stable family relationships is first, economic viability of the operation, prioritizing the previous generation, and continue the end result is continue ranching. We look at it on a timeline of 100 years. So there are 4 generations within that. Being able to continue ranching for the long term is our goal. And I'll just end with a final thought. I look at this, and without a succession plan, it's likely that you're turning your asset, your ranch, or your land into a liability for the next generation. By not having those conversations, it becomes a risk. Inheritance tax on top of a potential family disagreement, on top of no management transparency of the previous generation, puts that operation at risk. Thank you for your time, and I'll hand it back to Angela.
All right, thank you, Coby. So the next thing we're going to go into, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of the Nebraska Grazing Coalition, just as doing the same thing as Allan. All right. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition, we are a nonprofit organization that focuses on the enhancement of the grasslands. We have a board that consists of a group of ranchers and private landowners who focus on creating public awareness and improvement of the grazing lands of Nebraska. The organization's top focus is to provide voluntary technical assistance and provide educational opportunities to producers on grazing land management. Some of those programs that the Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition has, we have a prescribed fire to control eastern red cedar program. We have educational tours, events, and host traveling road shows. And we also have a generational transition program. Our prescribed fire program allows us to employ a couple of burn coordinators that can go out and help with controlled fires. It's believed that once mechanical removal of cedar trees has happened, the seed still lays on the ground and And the best way to get rid of that seed is to come back with fire to kill it. And those two burn coordinators, they can provide a warm body on a fire, or they can bring resources. We have equipment and tools to bring to those burns. Another piece of the Grazing Coalition is our educational tours and events. We currently have a couple of pasture tours that we've done in the past, where we go out and just tour different farms or ranches to see sort of how they are running their operation, so that others can learn from that. We also have a traveling roadshow where we'll bring in different speakers to hit different areas of the state and talk on a particular topic. Over the next year, we would like to have some grazing schools, possibly in Nebraska, for the next few years, and then bring in a ranching for profit course. That's kind of on our agenda for the next couple of years. Our generational transition program piece is kind of the piece that I work on. We host educational workshops and tours where we bring in a speaker to provide education on the legal aspects of transitioning the ranch to the next generation. We usually have a panel of producers who speaks on their experience and shares about the resources that they possibly used to transfer their generational transfer, kind of like what Coby talked about, the tools, and they share about their personal experiences. And then we do connect people with resources in their area. If there's a resource that you lack and you need connected to it, we'd like to provide resources to people. The last thing, I'll just share my contact information. We have some workshops that will be scheduled for the next year, whether it be our traveling roadshow or generational transition speakers. You can find those either on our website or on our Facebook page. And I'd just like to thank AgriWebb for letting me be here today to help facilitate this. And we're going to move into the Q&A time. All right.
And Angela, I think I saw Leah come in on the chat with inquiring about just the app that we use to track herd inventory, movements, treatments, feed. Or Leah, that's AgriWebb. That's the company that I currently work for. So we have a ranch management platform where you can map out your operation, track your herd inventories, have a plethora of reports, and being able to really understand the operation day to day or from afar if you're not on the operation. So it's a tool that we've deployed since 2020. And it's been enormously valuable as we navigate succession.
All right, and I'm sure that information will be sent out with the slides and the recording of this this webinar. So, all right,
Great.
Here's a question in the chat. What happens when the next generation doesn't want to run the operation like it's currently being run? Example, they want to divide it up.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think that really looking at the operation, and I always think the younger generation, at least I hope, as I'm a part of it, bring in new ideas, new perspectives, and it's something that we cautiously listen to. And if there's overlap in management, if we want to pursue value-added programs or shift and flex more to a stocker operation, we look at the merits of that and then slowly experiment with that before diving head deep in there. And the idea of wanting to divide it up, I think if the next generation doesn't want to come back to the operation, that should be something to consider for the previous generation, the preceding generation. If no one's committed to the buy-in, it might be a tough conversation, but maybe you lease it out. Maybe you look to monetize one of your primary asset bases. Kyle, I don't know if you want to opine on that.
Yeah, I sure can. No, you hit that, Coby, right on, nail on the head there. That's the hard discussion, right? And that's the one, there's a question here of how often that conversation looks like with lender. I think if you're going to be splitting it up or dividing up any of those cash flow enterprises within the operation, whether land holdings, the operation stock or the cow calf or the seed stock, if there's all those enterprises through that, that's a tougher discussion. So the more you can have that with your lender and keep them up to speed on what's happening, that's positive, right? It doesn't have to be monthly, because these things they take a lot of time, as Coby mentioned. I mean, it's a lot of discussion and planning. So at least once a year, when you're talking with your lender renewal, at least hit that subject there, because if you are going to move certain segments of the operation to different individuals, that lending relationship looks different, right? From ownership, from cash flow. Can it, Coby hit great. Well, will it cash flow? Can it survive by itself? Is the split the right thing? And so that's the big discussion, I think, is the lending relationship changes the more you change the operation that it's currently umbrellaed under. Coby, is how I see it.
Yep.
All right. So another question here, Kyle, specifically for you. What can or should conversations with your lender look like? Is it a simple heads up, or should you plan for a lengthy kickoff meeting with check-ins?
Yeah, and I kind of hit on that a little bit, Angela. It's not just a kickoff. It depends on how far you're into that planning, right? The first question is always going to be, are you having these discussions? Well, yes, we are, and here's where we are. Okay, but when you start getting into the nuts and bolts, that conversation, that communication probably needs to get a little more, happen more often through the relationship, because, as I said, depending on what the operation and the family and everybody decides, that really dictates what the lender needs to do, can do, etc. So those need to then increase those communications and conversations, because there may be some things that won't work for the lender, and so you got to work through that as a relationship and see where you need to go.
All right. Here's another question, might be more for Allan. I think he had to leave, so we'll see if one of you can answer it. Can you elaborate more on the fair versus equal concept and how to navigate children who want to take over versus those who do not?
Yeah, Angela, I can jump in here if that's okay. So fair versus equal is something that our family is currently navigating right now. So equal is each individual in the next generation gets an equal allocation of the land or the business, versus fair means the appropriate right. In reality, like the best example that I have with our experience is if one individual, if my younger brother comes back and decides to take over the operation, we need to be fair to that, with the end result in mind of continuing the ranching operation. So the idea that he owns a cattle operation, and let's say us kids have 25% of the land holding company, having him buy his siblings out at market value probably looks untenable. It looks like a perspective where having a 75% loan to value ratio, which contact Kyle if you're curious what that really means, is a high debt amount for an operation and can be a threat to the operation. So being conscious of that, we look to have a buyout clause that is fair, that allows it to not be easy for the one coming back, but adequate in the amount of sweat equity, passion, and really moving toward that end result of continuing the operation. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like a good suggestion. So let's see. I'm wondering if everyone can see the question in the Q&A. It was, how do you determine the basis for property gifted grandparents purchased in the 1950s? Allan answered it before he hopped off. If the property was gifted to you, my understanding is that the basis that your grandparents had is now your basis. If it is passed upon their death, then the basis is the value at the time of their passing. So he says, please check with your lawyer to determine exactly where you are with the basis. So, all right, any more questions for Coby or Kyle?
I did see that Marcia jumped in and asked if I travel to states to tell my experience. I don't specifically travel to states to talk about my family experience. Matt approached me about speaking here today about it, but I do travel quite a lot working with producers within the scope of AgriWebb. So Marcia, depending on where you're at, there's a decent likelihood that I'll be in the area and happy to sit down for a cup of coffee.
Awesome. Thank you, Coby.
Yep.
All right. I think that we're going to wrap this up unless there are any other questions. I think there's a final poll that should be popping up on your screen. So if everyone would like to take a minute to answer that question, we'd appreciate it. And I guess unless anyone has anything else to add, I'll just thank you all for joining us today on behalf of AgriWebb and all the presenters. I just enjoyed everything that was shared and look forward to being part of these in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for everyone that took the time today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yes, thank you. And if you have any questions, the 5 of us are here, and AgriWebb will get you our contact information.
Excellent. Thank you.